Hey everyone, this is MV Arts. We're on our way to getting familiar and comfortable in Blender. If you would like to follow along or just check out the end result to backwards engineer what I've done, you can download the project files on my website for free. At the time of this recording, it's a free website. I can host my downloads there. This is one of my favorite parts. Overall, I enjoy the whole creation process, but the shading is something we can look forward to. With shaders, we can tell the audience something about the properties of the surface of our models. Is it soft? Is it a hard surface? Can you use it to readjust your hair? Or is it a rougher surface? On top of that, we can use textures to sell the look of the material. Let me show you how to add a material to your model. I'm super excited to start on the forearm because this is an interesting color palette. Select the forearm. Open the Material tab in the Properties panel. Click on the plus sign right here. I'm going to split the window, like so. Or just right click on the edge of the window and say Split. In the other window, we want to open up the node editor. You can do this by clicking on the icon here, or use the shortcut F3 while hovering over the desired window. Personally, I'm used to the node system, but a lot of people like to use the material editor in the properties panel, which is perfectly fine. If we were to color our model with just flat colors, it could look something like this, or this and this. Although this could be a style choice, 3D software excels in shading our model. Adding a simple shader would give the model some highlights and shadows, ultimately creating a sense of depth in a scene. There is a crossroad when it comes to shading, where some people choose for non-photorealistic shading, in short NPR, and some people would choose physically based rendering, or PBR. Okay, moving on. Right off the bat we get the default principled shader, also known as the Uber shader. This shader is pretty much all you need in 90% of your work. From here you can build up realistic and complex materials. But first, let's take a step back and try to block in our flat colors. We're doing this to see if our color scheme is working on the model. I like to start with a simple and clean emission node. Delete the principled shader for now. We can either add shaders from the menu here, look up shader and unfold that to get a list of all shaders. Or we can Shift A, just like adding a cube in the viewport, go to shaders and pick emission. Hold Ctrl Shift and right click on the node. We can feed our selection directly in the material output. This only works when you have the Node Wrangler enabled. So, go to Preferences, Add-on, search for the Node Wrangler and check the box. Quickly change the color of the emission node to a dark gray or something else you like. It's time to preview what we've done so far. Blender has an interactive render mode. I set my shortcut for this to Shift Z. Let it boil for a second, and the noise will dissolve a bit more. Emission materials don't catch any shadows or highlights. So this will purely display the color we chose. Our forearm is now dark gray, just like we wanted. To add new colors, we can go into the Material tab and make a new material. Press the plus button to make a new material slot. Next we could hit New Material here and do the same thing we did before. But hey, I'm lazy, so I want to reuse the material we already made. Select that new material slot and browse through the list of materials. To find our dark gray, press the number next to the material name. By the way, this is an indicator of how many times this material is assigned to other objects. So click on the number to make a duplicate of the material. Now all we have to do is change the color to the color we need. If we would like to preview now, the forearm is still colored gray. That is because we need to assign this new material first. Before we do that, let's quickly create the third color we need. Add a new material slot, like so. Select the material and browse through the list. Select one of the colors we made before. Click the duplicate icon and change the color to something you like. Also, you could rename the materials to something more appropriate. Great! Now we're going into edit mode for the forearm. Select the vertices or polygons you would like to assign the new material to. I will island select this part of the mesh because it's a separate mesh inside this object. With these polygons selected, we can select one of the other materials in the Properties panel. Now all we need to do is press the Assign button right here. And voila! Repeat these steps for the other materials as well. In Edit mode, select the part of the mesh you want to assign a new material to. In the Material panel, choose the preferred material and press Assign. Let's preview this one more time. Okay, now let's do this for the rest of the model as well, shall we? I'm gonna speed through this so I see you on the other side. I'm pretty pleased with this outcome. Of course we need to do a lot of work still. Material slots can quite fast stack up to an uncontrollable mess. That's why people like to work with color maps. This is one texture image that defines the property, in this case the color, for an object. But before we can do that, we have to perform one small task known as unwrapping. To understand what unwrapping is and why we have to do it, we're gonna examine this with a simple cube first. We can ask our friend Scott here to unfold this cube for us. This is a very common way to unwrap a box. Unwrapping makes it easier to project a 2D image on a 3D model. Maybe Scott can draw a line over the unfolded cube from top to bottom. Normally we would do this in a program like Photoshop. When Scott finishes, he can reassemble the cube. You see, a perfect line across the cube here. But what happens when we let Scott draw all over the place and across all the seams? Go ahead Scott, give it a try. Thank you. That's perfect. Could you fold it back up one more time please? Now we can see there are seams in the cube visible, because the lines don't exactly connect like they're supposed to do. This means that textures would be interrupted on these lines. This is something we want to avoid, of course. We should be cautious about placing our seams. Only cut in seams on parts that are less noticeable. The best example I can give you is the shirt, sweater or whatever it is you're wearing right now. Because all our clothing has stitch lines. These were consciously placed on spots that are concealed most of the time. For example, the inside of the arm. When we stand in a natural position, this part of our clothing is covered up. Let's start by unwrapping the lower leg. To see what your unwrap is looking like, you can open up the UV editor. Split the window and press F10 while hovering over it. In edit mode, press U and unwrap. To give you a little more background information, textures are squared images. The resolution is doubled from 8 bits to the nowadays common 1024 by 1024, up to a 4K resolution of 4096. Since X, Y and Z are used for the 3D viewport's axes, the 2D representation of these axes are named U and V, hence UV unwrapping. The unwrap we just did doesn't really make sense. Let me show you. We're gonna set up a checker material. Follow along. Select the lower leg and add new material. Then delete the principled shader. Now we've got some room for the emission shader. Add that one in. Shift A again, and instead of going to shaders, we go to textures. From this list, select the checker pattern. Because we have the node wrangler enabled, we can select the checker node. If we then hit Ctrl T, we get our mapping info. This will give us our texture coordinates and mapping node. With these nodes, we can control how our texture is projected onto our mesh. All we have to do now is change this from generate to UV. Look at that, we made our first texture. We'll definitely come back to this. But for now, press Shift Z to preview render. If we take a closer look to the mesh, we see that the checker pattern is a bit funky. Some places are stretched, some places might be squashed. Of course, we want to minimize these effects. To do so, we have to make some seams in our model. Let's start by going into edit mode. Make sure you still have the UV editor open in a window. I will select some of these edges and we're done. We can press Ctrl E to pop up the edge menu. In there we can look up mark seam. The color of the edge is changed. Depending on your Blender theme, mine turned red. If we now unwrap the leg once again, with U and unwrap, we can see the difference that makes for our checker pattern. Let's make another cut somewhere. Ctrl E, then mark seams again. Let's once more unwrap this. Clearly, this didn't do us any good. Fortunately, we can delete these seams just as easy. Go back and select the seams, Ctrl E to enter the edge menu, and this time say clear seam. I will continue unwrapping the meshes. Try to make the checker pattern as perfect as possible. I quickly stopped the process here to show you this. This part isn't unwrapping as I expected. I created the seams where I wanted them, but the unwrap didn't come out as I wanted. So instead, I'm gonna do something else. A poly group can be easily selected once they're surrounded by seams. Just use L whenever you hover over a poly group for an island selection. Use one of the orthographic views that suits your scenario best. Front, back, left, right, top or bottom. On the numpad you can press 1, 3 or 7. Use 9 to go into the opposite view. Then press U and instead of unwrap, choose project from view. Yes, this worked like a charm. The projection from view was good, but we need to tweak the surrounding edge loop. What I'm gonna do now, in the UV editor, I'm gonna move some vertices around. We can use the same controls as in edit mode. G for moving, R for rotate and S for scale. Let me skip forward in this edit, so I can show you how I manipulated the UVs for this piece. At first I got some twisting and stretching where this part got bigger around the back. With my poly group selected, I'm gonna grab this vertices in the UV editor. Pressing Ctrl L to grow the island selection. To open the text tool menus, we need to press N. On the right side of this menu are some tabs visible. Select from these tabs the text tools. In this tab we go to UV layout. From this list we choose rectify. To clean these stray vertices, I'm gonna use snapping. Enable snapping down at the bottom and set the snapping to vertex. Snap to this vertex while constraining the y-axis. After that, snap this vertex while constraining to the x-axis. Now I'm gonna use proportional editing to scale up the back. Bring the vertices in on the front part of the mesh. I'm gonna straighten out the UVs again. Select this edge loop, disable proportional editing and press scale constrained by the X. Repeat this for the rest as well. After that, I'm reshaping the UV to resemble the mesh as good as possible. Keeping an eye on the checker material to see if I can get as close as I can to an even checker pattern. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm happy with this so far. Of course, I don't want to repeat this for the other side as well. Let me show you how I quickly work around this. First I'm gonna separate this mesh by selection. Go out of edit mode. Then select the part we just separated. Go back into edit mode. Now we want to get rid of the side we didn't do the unwrap on. Usually I'll do a loop selection right next to the middle poly loop. Delete those loops. Island select the remaining parts, best to do this in vertex mode. Otherwise you have to keep selecting the poly groups. Delete those as well. Go out of edit mode, add a mirror modifier like so. Place it above the subdivision modifier. If the pivot is centered right, that's fine. I usually pick the body as a mirror object. There will be a seam visible where the two UVs line up. At the backside I'm not that bothered by that. However, in the front it would be nice to clean this up. So what we can do, weld the UVs together. If I select the poly groups here, you see that the UVs are overlapping. If I move one, I move them both. So I deselect one in edit mode and move the selected one up in the UV editor. Now we can select the other one again. The orientation of this UV is mirrored, so let's fix that. Press Ctrl M and constrain that by pressing X. Enable snapping and set it to vertex closest. Snap the UV to the opposing one. First over the X and then over the Y. Like we've done before. All that's left to do now is select the middle vertices, right click and press weld from the list. I'll sometimes unwrap simple shapes like this with the smart UV unwrap. In cases like this, that works perfect. Now that we unwrapped all of the meshes, let's clean up the UV layout. Basically, we want to optimize the unwraps so that they have enough texture space. This will give us high resolution textures. The more space an island takes up on a UV layout, the higher the resolution will be. Luckily for us, Blender does a great job of automating this. If we select the whole object in edit mode, we can then press A to select all in the UV editor. Next, we want to make sure that every island is in the right proportion to one another. To do this, press Ctrl A. To make sure that there are no islands overlapping, press Ctrl P. This will package all of the UV islands in one texture space. In our next video, we will give our model some cool looking shaders. Show me your progress so far, tag me on Instagram @mvarts. For now, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you want to see more content in the future, subscribe to the channel. Also, you might like these other videos. As always, stay creative. See you next time. Ciao.